Week 2 of the playoffs is here. I hope you've made it this far, and let's start with the Thursday night matchup between the Rams and Seattle. Ton of implications here, not just from an NFL perspective, but probably for a lot of your fantasy teams. Very dependent on what Kyren Williams does for the LA Rams at the running back position. He's going to be in the B tier here on what is a pretty tough run defense. Seattle's run defense has allowed like the 5th least amount of fantasy points to running backs. You just saw them make it really, really tough for JT to do much last week. Blake Corum behind him is going to be in the F tier as well. So obviously Kyren is still going to be a start every single week. He still is very consistent, very reliable. But the interesting thing here is that Blake Corum has actually taken away some touchdown opportunity from Kyren, whether he's taking one at the house 20 yards out or if he's actually getting like goal line touches every once in a while. They do give him probably every third series. They give him a good amount of touches on some of those runs. So that's a little bit of a worry with Kyren and something that, you know, you can be concerned about, but it's not going to be anything where like you're not starting Kyren. He's going to be a must start every single week. Blake Corum behind him, I will list as a mad though. He does have touchdown upside, and honestly, when I talk about Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet here, like I'm no less confident starting Blake Corum than I am Kenneth Walker or Charbonnet, just because any of them can take one to the house at any given moment. Puka Nacua going to be in the S tier here. He's been phenomenal of recent, and now with no Devontae Adams, expect him to get probably at minimum 10 targets in this matchup. It is a tough one for wide receivers as well. Seattle across the board has a good defense. 3rd least amount of points allowed to fantasy wide receivers of recent. Behind him, Tutu Atwell, now the second guy available with no Devontae Adams. On the flip side, you got Seattle's running backs, Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet. I alluded to them up against Blake Corum. We have Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet both in the F tier. This is equally as tough of a matchup in terms of the run defense that they're going up against with the Rams front four. And look, I'm not expecting anything from either of these guys unless they score a touchdown. So between Corum, Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, all three of them will be mez in this matchup. There's no reliable running back outside of Kyren Williams. JSN, S tier right there with Puka Nacua, Rashid Shaheed, and Cooper Kupp. Just mentioning them at this point, they're in the G tier. They're not really startable in a neutral matchup for these Seattle wide receivers. Then we get to the Sunday slate. We've got Philly and Washington. A.J. Brown kind of came back down to earth after he's had a heck of a tear, but he still did outproduce Devontae Smith. So we are going to have A.J. Brown in the A tier here for Philly's wide receivers, listing him as a must start. And honestly, going up against Washington, who has one of the worst defenses in the NFL at the moment, Devontae Smith in the C tier, I am going to give you the green light with him. Of all the weeks you could expect both of these guys to produce, I would expect this week to be that week going up against Washington. And again, like 9th most amount of fantasy points to wide receivers of recent. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith could absolutely eat here. Not to mention A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith combining for like 20 points last week was really a result of Dallas Goedert scoring like 27 points. And we know that doesn't happen every single week with a guy like Goedert, who he vultures touchdowns one week and doesn't do anything the following week. So I think the receivers here will be fine. Saquon Barkley also going to be in the A tier for the running back position for Philly here. He's really kind of come into his own recently. It hasn't been pretty. It hasn't been last year, but again, the last couple of weeks, 18 and 17 points, over 20 carries. He's been finding the end zone, which is what he hasn't been able to do consistently all season long. So hopefully that can continue in another very favorable matchup for him. Expect him to have a good day. Behind him, Tank Bigsby, not rankable. Then we've got Washington, Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols. Rodriguez, the only guy worth mentioning here in a neutral matchup. He's going to be listed as a Met as well in the F tier. McNichols behind him is sit. It is funny though that JCM actually took one to the house last week. So again, you never know who it's going to be between any of these guys any given week. Who has the touchdown, they're going to be the guy that has maybe 10, 12 points. But very, very limited upside for any of these guys. Terry McLaurin is going to be a start here. He did salvage his day last week with not a ton of target volume. He did have a big play touchdown though, and that's what Terry McLaurin is capable of doing every single week. This is a tougher matchup against Philly's pass defense, but I will say they have allowed a decent amount of production to wide receivers this season. So Terry with Marcus Mariota honestly has had some of his most productive games this season when he's healthy. So expect him to be good to go. And then Deebo Samuel as well will have in the D's tier. He will also be a start. I'm okay with you going with him. I will say though, I'm not as confident in Deebo as I am Terry. Green Bay and Chicago. This is going to be another huge game for the NFC, determining who's going to be the favorites to take home that division. But for Josh Jacobs, who was essentially a game time decision last week and had a phenomenal day. I mean, if Josh Jacobs plays, there should be no question, no doubt in your mind that you should be starting him. So 23 points last week, a receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown, 6 yards per carry on the ground. You would never have guessed that this guy was injured, except the snap share, like 50% snap share. I think it's very interesting how they utilize him. He's not on the field constantly, and honestly, I think it's kind of good for him. But Emmanuel Wilson, the guy behind him, is not rankable. He'll be a sit. Josh Jacobs start every single week in the 8s here in a neutral matchup against Chicago's run defense. For our receivers, we have Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, and Matthew Golden. Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs are both going to be listed in the D's tier here. Generally, I would not be super excited about starting either of these guys. Jaden Reed in his second game back healthy last week against Denver, a really difficult pass defense, had 10 points, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 55 yards. Romeo Doubs actually had 3 targets, 2 receptions, 36 yards, good for 5 points, and he hasn't really been doing much since he had a good stretch in the middle of the season there. So look, do I feel good about either of these guys? Absolutely not. If you have to flex them, is it okay? Yes, because they are going up against Chicago's pass defense, who's allowed the 4th most amount of points to wide receivers of recent. Matthew Golden, though, is going to be a sit. Obviously, honestly, the only reason that we rank him every single week is because people care about him, know his name, and it's not a super deep wide receiver room there with all the injuries that they go through constantly. But Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, both in the D's here, I am going to list them as mez. I'm not confident enough to say that, oh yeah, you absolutely have to start them, because I don't know which one it's going to be. I wouldn't be shocked if one of these guys goes out and has a really good day, especially with no Christian Watson, which is why they're going to be elevated. But again, which one is it going to be? Is it going to be Reed? Is it going to be Doubs? No Watson, no Wicks, Golden probably not going to do much. So again, like, expect one of them to be fine. We haven't really gotten any indication of who it's going to be because it's so up and down with Reed and Doubs just historically. I think it's going to be very matchup dependent. Then we got Chicago's running backs, DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. DeAndre Swift really reestablished himself as the guy there over the last couple of weeks. He's looked really solid. 2011, 22 points to Monangai's 19, 8, and 3 points, with Swift's snap share being a tick above Monangai's. So DeAndre Swift going to be comfortably in the C tier here as a start, and then Kyle Monangai going to be a meh. Again, any given week, like Charbonnet, like Walker, like Blake Corum, those types of guys can take one to the house. He can get a goal line carry. He can get a big chunk play, maybe a nice receiving play, something like that. He's always capable of it, but again, not something that you're really comfortable flexing at this point in time in the semifinals of the playoffs. So we'll go with meh, with Monangai in the F tier. Then the wide receivers with no Rome Odunze. We expect, again, they said that he was week to week after he re-injured his foot in warmups last Sunday. So I'm not expecting him. I don't think many people are expecting him to be ready to go this week. DJ Moore, that really leaves him as the guy here. And he's going to be in the C tier. Day to day for Luther Burden. That's kind of why we have DJ Moore this high. Look, if there's no Luther Burden, I'm going to change this meh light to a green light for DJ Moore because he's literally the last man standing, the only guy available. If Luther Burden does start, what we'll actually do is we'll probably bring DJ Moore down a tier and have Luther Burden in the same tier, if not a tier higher, because he's actually gotten more consistent target volume than DJ Moore has demonstrated like pretty much all season. The last 5 weeks, Burden has had 5, 5, 6, 6, and 7. DJ Moore has had 3, 7, 5, 3, and 5. So a lot more up and down there. But again, he is coming off a 22-point game against Cleveland where he had 2 touchdowns. But again, the week before that against Green Bay, 0.6 points. So he's just not super reliable. But with no Rome Odunze, there is more opportunity there for him to have a really big day. That's why I'm giving you the green light for DJ Moore. Olamide Zaccheaus, the only other guy that's really guaranteed to be healthy for this game, barring anything freakish. He's not really rankable. He'll be a sit here. Buffalo and Cleveland. This matchup's pretty ugly from a fantasy perspective. Only a couple of guys that we trust, and it's the 2 running backs. James Cook, A tier. He'll be a start every single week. He's been one of the most productive, reliable guys all season. Ty Johnson behind him is a sit. Khalil Shakir at wide receiver for Buffalo is now in the F tier. He's been a lot more shaky towards the end of the season, honestly. He's had 1, 9, 11 points. He had, again, a decent showing against New England, now against Cleveland. What's he going to do? We don't really know. I'm going to list him as a meh, ranked in the F tier here. Again, if he gets a touchdown, it's like, yeah, you'll probably see a decent day from him, but his target volume has gone down significantly from what we saw over like a 7 to 8 week stretch from week 4 to week 10, 11, 12. So it's just kind of iffy with him. You never know when those tight ends are just going to, take away all the touchdown opportunity in the red zone in Dawson Knox and Kincaid. With Kincaid back healthy, I do think that actually hurts Shakir a little bit. And then we've got the number one running back for Cleveland, Quinshon Judkins in the C tier. He's a start every single week. He's a lot more boom bust, a lot more up and down, very low floor. Decent enough high ceiling. Again, he gets so much opportunity in the red zone. It's just how often are they going to be in the red zone? This is a positive matchup for Quinshon, though. The fourth most amount of points to fantasy running backs allowed recently for Buffalo's defense. And then you got the wide receivers for Cleveland, Judy and Isaiah Bond. We say this every single week. They are not the top wide receiver options for Shedeur Sanders. It's Harold Fannin. So you're sitting Judy and Bond every single week. Then we got the Chargers in Dallas. Amarian Hampton, back from his injury, has been pretty like he found the end zone against Philly in week 14, which salvaged his day. And then he's getting like 15 carries against Kansas City, just over 4 yards per carry. Like he looks good. That offense as a whole is just not as consistently explosive as it was at the beginning of the year before they went through all these injuries. So again, I view him very similar to Quinshon, where if he finds the end zone, he's going to have a good, decent day. If he doesn't, it's just, he's kind of going to lay a stinker for you. And you kind of have to live with that. Kamani Vidal behind him is a sit now that Hampton is back. This is a good matchup for the running backs, though. A green matchup light. So fingers crossed, hoping that Hampton's going to have a really good day. Ladd McConkey going to be in the C tier. Kind of similar here with Ladd. Like, again, very, very good matchup. Dallas has a terrible pass defense as well. They just have a terrible defense across the board in terms of fantasy production. Like, expect a good day from Ladd, but you never know when Keenan is just going to take all that production. It's not going to be QJ this week, at least for now. We don't have him ranked. He missed last week. If he misses this week, I do think that's more of a positive for Ladd to have more opportunity to produce at a high level. He only scored 4 points, though, against Kansas City with no Quentin Johnson. This is, of all the weeks for Ladd to have a good day, though, it is against Dallas. Same with Keenan Allen, too, who's going to be in the G tier, though I'm not going to recommend you start him. If you're absolutely forced to, though, again, just hope that he has a decent enough day. Trey Harris in the I tier, not going to be a start either. Then on the Dallas side of the ball, we've got Javonte in the A tier this week. He's going to be a must start in a neutral matchup for running backs there. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, A and B tier respectively. CeeDee has kind of taken over that number one spot again, at least in terms of target volume the last couple of weeks. 8 and 10 targets, good for 18 and 17 points. Still hasn't really found the end zone very consistently this season, but Pickens has taken a step back. 9 and 6 targets for 8 and 6 points. So both still very, very good must-start options every single week. You're just a little bit worried. It's like, okay, Pickens really got to pick it up this week against the Chargers, or he might cost you in the semifinals. Hopefully he can find the end zone or kind of bring that target volume back up to what we got used to seeing over that midseason stretch. Kansas City and Tennessee, obviously the big news about this matchup is going to be, okay, yeah, there's no Patrick Mahomes anymore. He just tore his ACL. That ultra sucks. And now Gardner Minshew is going to be the guy there. You could not ask for a better matchup, honestly, for Rashee Rice to produce despite there being no Patrick Mahomes. They are going up against Tennessee. Green light matchup for Rashee Rice going up against Tennessee's secondary. And Gardner Minshew, while he's a backup caliber quarterback and has his limitations, I mean, the last time that he started a significant amount of time during the season, like you saw a guy like Michael Pittman produce at a really solid level. You saw Jacoby Myers have some really good days with Gardner Minshew. So that's something that like a lot of people have been asking us this week in their start sits is, hey, what do we do with Rashee Rice? Like, am I going to be worried about Rashee Rice? I'm like, yeah, you'll be worried, but you can't not start him. Like he's the number one option there. He runs mostly out of the slot. And Gardner Minshew is capable of throwing the football. Like, they're going to get the ball to Rashee Rice. I would expect him to be fine while he may have a lower floor with no Patrick Mahomes. I think the ceiling is still pretty undeniable there, and the opportunity is pretty undeniable there. You can't not start this guy. Xavier Worthy in the G tier is going to be a sit, though. He's been so unreliable, and his ceiling is just so capped. Kareem Hunt and Pacheco both in the G tier. Who's going to score the touchdown? You don't know. And even if they do, they're just a step down below some of those F tier guys that we talked about, like Walker, like Corum. They're just not high ceiling guys whatsoever. It is a neutral matchup for the running backs there. Tennessee's running backs, you got Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears. Pollard, I will list as a meh. In the D tier, this is a red matchup across the board for Tennessee going up against Kansas City's run defense has allowed the sixth least amount of points to fantasy running backs of recent. I don't trust any of these guys. I don't trust anybody in this offense. Jim Ray DK and Alec Iomanner for the wide receivers there are going to be sits as well. Again, this offense has been really bad, really ugly all season long. You never know who's going to have the big day, if any at all. Cincinnati and Miami. We got Chase Brown at the running back position for Cincy in the A tier, must start every single week. He's really come into his own. I mean, for a guy that was a second-round draft pick consistently this season in fantasy, who really, really disappointed to start the year, has just turned it on big time the second half of the season, and it's really been needed with all the injuries that have been going on. He's been so reliable in the situation. And Joe Burrow is honestly helping him quite a bit because of all those checkdowns. P. Ryan behind him is an insurance option in the I tier. He's a sit. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We are going to rank T. Higgins, though Higgins is still in concussion protocol. Regardless if these guys are both going, even if Higgins is ready to go, they're both going to be green lights. They're both going to be starts. Joe Burrow offers plenty of passing volume. They got shut out last week. They scored 0 points. This offense scored 0 points last week, and Jamar Chase still scored 23 points. And I know it was with no T. Higgins, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, but still, the volume here provided for these wide receivers constitutes just a must start every single week, whether they score 0 points as a team or 30 points as a team. It really doesn't matter. Miami has Devon Achane in the S tier. He's going to be a must start every single week. A great matchup for him. Expect him to pop off. This is one of the worst run defenses in the league, allowing some of the best running back fantasy production all season long. Jalen right behind him is going to be a sit. It's all Achane, and that's it. Jalen Waddle is going to be a start in the B tier as well. He's kind of cooled off a little bit the last couple of weeks, honestly. But again, of all the matchups I would expect him to really do well against, it would be Cincinnati. Again, the last 4 weeks, 8, 7, 18, and 4 points. But that Cincinnati matchup, I would expect it to be pretty high scoring. See if they can, show up as an offense a little bit better than they did against Pittsburgh. Then we got Malik Washington, and he's in the J tier. He'll be a sit most weeks. Breece Hall in another ugly matchup, going to be in the D tier here. I will give you the green light there. It's Breece Hall. He's been very up and down this season in a terrible offense. Of all the lower end running back ones remaining in the league that aren't injured backups that are coming to, you fill openings, Breece Hall is going to be one of the more talented guys there that's still inconsistent. Just a little bit of a step below a Hampton or a Judkins, but still okay with you flexing them. Isaiah Davis behind him, A.D. Mitchell, John Mechie at wide receiver. None of these guys are starts. New Orleans, you've got Evan Hull now, who's the next man up in the F tier. For the Saints at the running back position. Devin Neal went down with that injury in the middle of the game, and what we saw is that Evan Hull was getting a majority of the work there, a majority of the snap share once Neal went down. So what that indicates to us is that he's probably going to be the guy that gets a good chunk of the opportunities in snap share, as opposed to Audric Esime, who we are going to have in the G tier. We're not going to have him that far apart. Again, just what we saw from a snap share perspective last week once Neal went down, we were okay, Evan Hull is probably going to be the guy that they favor. Would I be shocked if this is a 50-50 split? No. But Evan Hull has also demonstrated that he has some receiving upside as well. So we will give him the nod over Esime. Not comfortable with either of them as starts. I'm going to go meh with Evan Hull because Devin Neal has been productive since Kamara has been out. So I think anybody really can be productive there at the running back position if they're getting a majority of the snaps. Meh for Evan Hull, sit for Audric Esime. Chris Olave for the wide receivers here, neutral receiving matchup in terms of production. He's going to be in the A tier. He's phenomenal. Tipton behind him is a sit. Aaron Jones for Minnesota in this matchup against the Giants. Actually, very favorable matchup for him. Going to be in the C tier. I'll list him as a start this week. Jordan Mason going to be a sit in the F tier. He is a step behind. Aaron Jones doesn't have the receiving capabilities either. Jefferson and Addison, we have this conversation every single week. Who do we start? You kind of have to start him. You kind of have to start him again. Again, Jefferson last week, I understand you can't account for the touchdowns that were called back and the drops and all that stuff because he just needs to capitalize and finally produce, and he hasn't been. But he did have a touchdown call back last week, and he had a lot of overthrown balls, but McCarthy did look better. And again, this is one of those matchups that you just can't turn down. They're playing the Giants. There's too much touchdown upside, too much big play opportunity for both of these guys to produce in what's been a defense that's allowed some of the highest production to wide receivers this season. This is for Jefferson and Addison, both in the D's tier. I am going to give you the green light for both as flex options. Jalen Naylor, H tier, he's a sit. Tyron Tracy will be in the B tier coming off a 27-point game last week in a neutral matchup against Minnesota's run defense. He'll be a start. Devin Singletary is a sit in the H tier. Then you got Wan'Dale in the B tiers coming off like a 16-point game, kind of salvages the day with a touchdown. But again, this is what Wan'Dale does. He gets a decent amount of target volume, is usually utilized quite a bit out of the slot, gets a lot of those 5 to 10 yard gains, and then he can pop one off any given week and he can have a real nice day for you. So he's a solid start, solid flex option every week. Darius Slayton going to be a sit in the G tier. Tampa and Carolina up next. We got Bucky Irving in the C tier, must start every single week in a neutral matchup against Carolina's run defense. Then it gets kind of complicated with the wide receivers because behind Bucky Irving, you have Sean Tucker, Rachaad White, both sits. Mike Evans, Igbuka, Chris Godwin at the wide receiver position. And Mike Evans, and when they said they're going to have him on a snap count last week, they were like, yeah, we'll have him on crucial downs, and that turned into well over 100 receiving yards on 55% snap share. What the heck? I love it when teams screw us over like that, and he gets 12 targets, 132 yards, 19 points. So he's a must start. He's in the A tier this week. He's Baker's guy when he's healthy. He looked like the old Mike Evans, the old uninjured Mike Evans. So it really gets complicated with Igbuka and Godwin because Godwin had way less target volume than Mike Evans had. Way less target volume, I believe, than Igbuka had. He only had 5 targets, and Igbuka had 7 targets. Okay, not way less, but you still saw a bump up in volume for Igbuka over Godwin. Godwin just had the touchdown, 4 receptions, 20 yards, and a touchdown to Igbuka's 4 receptions, 64 yards, and no touchdowns. You kind of see the type of receivers that these, or the type of skill sets that these guys have when they play together. Mike Evans, your big play, true X wide receiver. Godwin out of your slot. Igbuka, more of a hybrid guy who does have a little more explosive ability when he does get the ball. He just hasn't found the end zone in quite a while. So against Carolina, that we expect to be a pretty high scoring affair, I'm going to give you the green light with every single one of these guys. I mean, this is flashback to the Chargers at the beginning of the year when it was Ladd, QJ, and Keenan Allen. I guess you start all of them and hope that you're not the odd man out. I'm saying this with Igbuka and Godwin. I hope you're not the odd man out, but you kind of got to start both of them this week. It's probably going to be a pretty fun game to watch and a lot of points scored. Then for Carolina, it's a lot more straightforward. Rico Dowdle has really reestablished himself as the guy in terms of snap share over Chuba Hubbard. I'll give you the green light with him. Hasn't been finding the end zone, but he was still pretty decently productive last week. And then Chuba Hubbard in the G tier, I am going to list as a sit. Tat McMillan going to be in the D tier. Very, very boom bust. He's kind of been Emeka Egbuka-esque, but of all the weeks for Tet to have a good day, it would be against Tampa. Bryce likes to kind of pop off against his division opponents here. So Tet will be in the D tier. I'll give you the okay there. Jalen Coker behind him in the F tier is going to be a sit in a neutral matchup across the board for these running backs and wide receivers for Carolina. Then we got Jacksonville and Denver. This is a really tough matchup for the running backs and wide receivers for Jacksonville. But again, this offense has been pretty solid, especially Travis Etienne, who's going to be in the A tier. He's a start every single week. Even though Denver's allowed the 4th least amount of points to fantasy running backs of recent, I think Etienne's still going to be okay. Not going to do what he did last week, but he'll still be a must start. Then for the receivers, you got Jacoby Myers and BTJ. Parker Washington, I tier, sit behind them. I'm going to give you the green light for Myers and BTJ. Myers has really kind of been the glue that's holding everything together for the wide receivers there since they traded for him. He's been the most reliable option there for sure for Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence seems to really like him. Jacoby Myers is just getting consistent target volume more than anybody else is there, including BTJ. He's kind of the highest floor option there. BTJ is kind of coming to his own the last couple of weeks, 11 and 17 points, found the end zone last week. Hopefully you can do that this week again in what is a tougher matchup against Denver. But I still think that he's going to be an all right flex option for you. Then we got Denver and their running back situation, RJ Harvey, who kind of came back down to earth last week. And he's kind of been making his production the last few weeks with touchdowns. And he didn't get any targets this week. So while he was efficient on the ground, only got 1 target, no receptions. It just kind of sucks. But I am going to give you the okay to start him this week because he is the only guy available there. And then Cortland Sutton, going to be a start in the B tier, who's been a little more productive recently. Troy Franklin and Lil Jordan Humphrey behind him. Going to be sits. You never know who, after Cortland Sutton at the wide receiver position, is going to be productive for Denver any given week. Sutton's the only guy that you can kind of sort of trust in. Atlanta and Arizona is kind of an ugly matchup here. Bijan Robinson, the only guy you're comfortable starting in the S tier for Atlanta at the running back position, and then behind him is Tyler Algier, insurance play in the G tier. Green lights across the board. Expect a big day from Bijan against a pretty lackluster Arizona defense that has a lot of limitations. Wide receivers there, if there's no Drake London, David Sills and Darnell Mooney are still not starts. Kyle Pitts is honestly the guy that you want to start. But these guys are not consistent. They don't really show any semblance of any upside whatsoever, even when there isn't a London in that offense this year. Mooney has been a huge disappointment, but hopefully, fingers crossed, London is back, and then he'll be a must start. We'll probably put him up there in the A tier in a pretty favorable matchup for himself. Arizona loses another running back, Bam Knight, which means Michael Carter is now the guy there. It's no longer a 3-man backfield. It's a 2-man backfield between Carter and Amari DiMarcado, who we have both listed in the F tier. I did see the snap share splits between Carter and DiMarcado was definitely favoring Michael Carter last week once Bam Knight went down, so I'll go meh for Michael Carter in the F tier, then I'll go sit with Amari DiMarcado. But again, I'm not feeling comfortable starting either of these guys. Neutral matchup, so one of them could pop off a touchdown. You never know, but they're not trustworthy options. Michael Wilson absolutely is. He'll be in the A tier in a green matchup against Atlanta's secondary if Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play. So if Marv is inactive again with that heel injury, must start for Michael Wilson. He will move down significantly, not unstartable, but he'll move down significantly, more of an iffy start, iffy flex option. If Marv comes back, you see that target volume consistently go down when Marv is on the field. But assuming that Marv doesn't play, Michael Wilson must start. He's been phenomenal. Jalen Brooks behind him is like the second guy. He's not rankable. He's a sit. Then we got Pittsburgh and Detroit. Kenneth Gainwell actually had a really, really, really good day last week. His snap share went up to 52%, 13 carries, 80 yards, 7 targets, 7 reception. I mean, the last 5 weeks, Gainwell has had 8, 6, 3, 7, and 7 targets. He's kind of the receiving upside guy there, 29, 18, 6, 16, and 19 points. He is more productive than Jaylen Warren is. He has a higher ceiling than Jaylen Warren does. I'll give you that. So honestly, I will give you the green light with Kenneth Gainwell. I'm going to give you more of the iffy light with Jaylen Warren ranked in the F tier this week in a matchup against Detroit, where I do think the one who is going to have a pretty decent day would be the one that has more consistent receiving upside in Kenneth Gainwell. But it's a red matchup for both of these running backs. The second least amount of points of fantasy running backs of recent for Detroit's front four. Then we got DK Metcalf as a start in the B tier, very boom bust, and then Adam Thielen's the second guy there. He's a sit. Jahmyr Gibbs, S tier for Detroit's running back room this week. Expect him to have a good week. David Montgomery, I still am going to list as a sit. He's touchdown or bust. Amon-Ra St. Brown and JMO have both been very productive of recent. JMO has been very Chase Brown-esque, honestly, where he's just really turned it on the second half of the year. And I would expect that to continue. He's getting a decent amount of volume, very explosive, getting the touchdowns. And then Amon-Ra, obviously one of the more reliable wide receivers in the NFL, who plays even through injury. For Vegas and Houston, expect this to be a pretty lopsided matchup as a whole. Genti, the only really startable, flexible guy for Vegas at this point. I mean, this offense, this team, this franchise is in shambles. He's the only relevant guy to watch there. Trey Tucker and Jack Bech at wide receiver are in the J tier. They're not startable. Red lights across the board for the matchups that they're going up against in Houston's secondary. Houston looking like one of the better defenses in the NFL. Now, Woody Marks has been banged up. They actually just signed another guy, another running back to their squad as well. So that makes you wonder what Woody Marks' health is going to be. He was kind of in and out of the game on Sunday. Hopefully he's good to go. If he's a go, he will be a start in the B tier. He gets a lot of touchdown opportunity in the red zone with no Nick Chubb. And then Nico Collins going to be a must start every single week. He's got that awesome upside, that alpha ability. He can salvage his day with touchdowns, even if his target volume is really low. Jaden Higgins and Christian Kirk behind him are going to be sits. This is a green matchup for Nico Collins, where Vegas has allowed like the 7th most amount of points to fantasy wide receivers this season. Then we got the Sunday night game, New England and Baltimore. TreVeyon Henderson, I'm going to list in the A tier. TreVeyon Henderson really starting to separate himself from Ramondre, which is very, very promising, very exciting to see. It's not like Ramondre doesn't take away snap share and opportunity. I mean, 67% snap share last week to Henderson's only 48. But what you have seen, even with the snap share being a little lopsided with these two guys, like Henderson's just more efficient. Henderson looks better when he gets the ball. Henderson has more receiving explosiveness and capability. in these in these must-win games at the end of the season for New England to want to get a chance to get that 1 seed, like you either have to accept that Henderson is your guy or just continue to be stupid and run Ramondre over him. And I mean, I guess that's fine if they want to do that. I'm no Patriots fan, but like Travion Henderson is much better. He's got way higher upside, has the explosive ability. He took like 260 yarders to the house. He can do that any given week. And against Baltimore's defense, who's been a shell of what they have been in years past, like I'd expect him to do well and Ramondre to be a sit. Stephon Diggs going to be in the D's tier here. I'll give you the okay to start him. And then Kayshon Boutte and Mac Hollins behind him are going to be sits in the H tier respectively. Derrick Henry in the C tier will be a start. Again, when he doesn't have a touchdown, he's going to be anywhere from 8 to 12 points. When he does have a touchdown, he'll be closer to 20, like 17 to 20. Keaton Mitchell behind him is a sit. Zay Flowers in a neutral matchup against New England's secondary is going to be a start in the B tier. He's been really, really solid the last couple of weeks. No one behind him is rankable. And then the final game of the week, get to watch old Phillip Rivers go up against San Fran, San Fran's defense. But CMC probably going to pop off. Not probably, he is going to pop off. S tier, expect him to really help you get through the semifinals this week if you own him. Jawan Jennings, a must start every single week now that Ricky Pearsall is banged up again. No Brandon Ayuk for the rest of the year. Jennings has been really, really, really solid since he's been back healthy, and there's been no Pearsall, and Purdy has come back healthy. He's being, just even more consistent now too. It's nice to see. But CMC and Jawan Jennings are really the only rankable skill position guys here at running back and wide receiver for San Fran, because it's really them and then Kittle, and that's about it. Great matchups for all these guys, so I would expect every single one of them probably to pop off. For the Colts, you got JT in the A tier, who's really come back down to earth of recent against tougher defensive matchups, and the offense really just cooling off as a whole. He is a must start every single week though, and of all the weeks that he would really pop off, it would be against San Fran's defense, who has their shortcomings given all their injuries that they've suffered from this year. Michael Pittman is going to be in the D tier this week. I'll give you the go ahead to start him. He does seem to be the most viable option for Phil Rivers, who can't throw the ball further than 10 yards down the field consistently. And then after that, it's Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, who really just have touchdown upside, and that's about it. They can't command enough target volume with Phillip Rivers because they're just going to want to run the ball probably a lot with JT, slow down the pace of play. They went from being a really high-scoring offense with Jones to now they're probably going to try to keep this a low-scoring affair just to keep Purdy, CMC, and Kittle from absolutely annihilating them. So Pitty really the only guy that like I'm okay with you starting because of those short to intermediate routes that he consistently runs and is very reliable with. But Downs and Pierce this week are going to be sits in the H tier. And that'll do it for this week. So hope you all fare well in your semifinal matchups. Hope you can advance to the championship. And we will be here next week again doing the final matchups video of the season to help you guys win your fantasy leagues. Best of luck to you, and we will see you again next week with the video.